Here in the UK, the Suicide Squad released a week earlier than in the US. Luckily enough, I have already seen it in cinema. Therefore, it's time to update my DCEU ranking for the third time. Let me know what your ranking is down below and let's get into it. Coming in at 11th and last place is Wonder Woman 1984. Initially, I thought I was going crazy when I was the only one who seemed to dislike it when it was first released, because I watched it when it first came out and all the reviews I'd seen had been positive for it, but I thought this movie was a complete mess. To be fair, the movie was very ambitious, a lot more than anyone could have imagined, but that does not make a movie good. Chris Pine was the standout. However, besides that, it was really hard to draw any real positives from this film. There were so many plot holes, and then there's other things where it just feels like they've made it up as they've gone along and haven't planned it from the movie that came before this, because they suddenly discover things about themselves which you would have thought they'd be able to do it all this time. There's no real indication as to why they didn't do it in the previous films, especially when it doesn't really add up in terms of the timeline. I mentioned the plot has so many holes in it, but the other writing, the script, wasn't too much better, because there were points where I'd laugh at how poor the dialogue was and couldn't believe how much worse this is in terms of quality compared to its predecessor. There were parts which were way too over the top, the villains included, who weren't even that great, filled with cliches. So as I said initially, this film, it's a complete mess. Continuing on with messy movies, in 10th place we have Suicide Squad. Not to be mistaken with the newly released one, this is probably the reason James Gunn was given the opportunity to make his, but we'll touch upon that later because this absolutely misfired. Whilst this does contain a lot of the negatives that Wonder Woman 1984 does, the messy plot, the poor dialogue, just in general, the execution is very unclear, and I know there's a lot of stuff behind the scenes with director David Ayer, which he's recently posted a statement about, where he was very restricted with his vision. But the final product we actually got here, it's very underwhelming. The characters got very much no development except for Harley Quinn, who obviously was a standout and has continued in this franchise, being one of the only people to survive from this movie into James Gunn's movie. But Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn, mixed with a real sense of style and a very good soundtrack, you can't save this project because it's quite a disaster. Coming in at 9th place is the Justice League, the 2017 cut, also known as Justice League. The MCU is a big success. They obviously spent their time developing origin movies or bringing in characters in previous movies before they attempted a big team-up movie. The DCEU wanted to catch up to it immediately and skipped over a lot of origin movies, a lot of development, and just dumped them all into this movie, and it really does show. Characters like The Flash, Cyborg, literally have no impact, or if they do, instantly forgettable. The only part it is memorable for is how bad some of their dialogue is, especially The Flash. But even characters we do know, like Batman, just feels very out of character, especially what was established in Batman v Superman. So many things are brushed over. The plot is quite big on scale, but the execution just doesn't make it feel like it is at all. An easy comparison is, of course, the Avengers, where you felt the big scale, like the city was, under threat, the world even, and the same goes for here, but in terms of the execution, it just feels so much more smaller scale. The color tone mixed with the CGI made it kind of uncomfortable and awkward to watch at times, and another problem with the CGI is the main villain, Steppenwolf, who isn't only bad for his visual look, but also the execution, the way he's written. There's no flavor to him, there's no depth. He's just an extremely bland villain who bored me to death every time he was on screen. But of course, a lot of these problems have been fixed, which we'll talk about in a bit. Coming in at 8th place is Birds of Prey. Yeah, I'm not even going to attempt to memorize the whole of that title. So as I said, Margot Robbie was a huge standout in Suicide Squad, and making her the lead of her own movie, she really takes the opportunity to make this character more likable. Other than some good performances from Ewan McGregor and Chris Messina, oh, and not to mention some of the best hand-to-hand combat in the DCEU. This film does also have its problems, like a lot of these films. It's titled Birds of Prey, but the characters which make the Birds of Prey don't really form until the very end, and even then they don't really have great chemistry together at all. And look, I don't like to pick on actors, especially when they're young, but Ella J. Basco felt a bit out of her depth working with the actors and actresses around her. I know many like the continuous jumps forward and back in time with Harley Quinn narrating as sort of the unreliable narrator, and I know it makes sense to the character, but it did make it a bit confusing at times, and I didn't really like it that much. I know it's subject to opinion. Some people do, some people don't. I fall into the latter, and to be honest, I'm not a huge fan of this film. Coming in at 7th place is SHAZAM. Now, this general concept allows for some fun moments, which Zachary Levi eats up and puts in a very energetic and enjoyable performance. He really does make it believable that he is a kid inside of an adult superhero body, especially with some of the funny things he tries to do and gets away with, like buying beer, going to a strip club, etc. And it certainly is a unique superhero movie that young audiences will really enjoy. However, for me, I wasn't as huge of a fan. It's quite an unpopular opinion to have it maybe this low on this list, but the humour didn't really land for me. As I said, there was a lot of humour which young audiences would like. I didn't find it that amusing, and maybe the things that I did enjoy when I first watched it when it first came out, I haven't really liked it. Not all of it has really aged well, as it was very like pop culture heavy for that time, especially one that comes to mind is The Floss. Other than that, I just couldn't help but feel the plot and villain was quite cheesy. I know it's meant to be a fun movie, it's a lazy description, but I couldn't help but cringe at moments. Obviously, I've frowned upon poorly executed things in this franchise, but this was probably one of the only times I've cringed to, if that even is a word. So it's not an awful movie, it's obviously fun. As I mentioned plenty of times, kids will love it, but for me, I didn't love it. Being this high up may be controversial, but coming in at 6th place is Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. Now, I'm not gonna defend this film for its infamous faults because we know they weren't executed to expectation, but those aside, it's still a fun, enjoyable watch if you can put your irritation to the side. One, it was great to see Superman and Batman share the screen in live action form, and I think their individual characters did justice, that wasn't actually intentional, but did justice to the source material, and I think every fan can say that both Henry Cavill and Ben Affleck did a good job. The action was very enjoyable, especially a famous warehouse scene with Batman, which was gone down as one of the best Batman fight scenes of all time. There were some very, very interesting consequences following on from Man of Steel, how that affects Superman and also Batman, and I'm glad they didn't just pretend it didn't happen. It was a huge factor for this film and added a bit of realism in a world of a man flying around in underwear. But yes, it did have its disappointments. Execution wasn't there 100%. Jesse Eisenberg's Lex Luthor wasn't a convincing enough villain, as his performance was extremely awkward. A great actor, but the way he was written was uncomfortable to look at with how energetic he was, as well as the film's rhythm, momentum was constantly disrupted when they were trying to set up this Justice League movie out of nowhere. So yes, it does have these faults, but I can look past them and enjoy this movie for the two iconic heroes that are put on screen together. Coming in at 5th place is Aquaman. Aquaman is a DC character who's never really been taken seriously and is sort of the butt end of a joke, but James Wan kind of adapts that into this film, making for an extremely fun and self-aware superhero outing. In principle, the plot is very familiar, but the colourful scenery and unique atmosphere allow for it to stand out amongst these DCEU movies, and even the superhero genre. Jason Momoa fills the role well and brings in his charismatic energy to further excel this character. However, Patrick Wilson didn't really deliver for me. In general, I just feel like he was miscast as the main villain, Ocean Master, with him somehow feeling over the top for this over-the-top movie. Black Manta was actually a far better villain in my opinion, but limited screen time pushed him to the side, but I know he's coming back for the sequel, so I look forward to seeing that. Black Manta being involved with a lot of these action scenes which were superbly shot, a lot of them in one takes by the looks of it, and even when not, great fighting sequences using the source material to its advantage. It's safe to say that Aquaman did exceed expectations for me. However, it was unfortunate enough to come out the same year as Black Panther, which deals with a very similar plot, so naturally that does bring this one back down as it feels familiar. However, a very fun superhero journey which I enjoyed rewatching. Coming in at 4th place is Man of Steel. This is an extremely different tone to Aquaman. It is a lot more serious. Man of Steel probably doesn't deliver the nostalgia fans of Superman 1978 were hoping for, but it is a very solid modern telling of his origin story with updated special effects and fantastic visuals, which at the time created a sturdy foundation for this DC extended universe, though it obviously hasn't maintained the same quality since starting. And I won't lie, Man of Steel does sacrifice a lot of fun in telling this origin story. It is very well acted by Henry Cavill, who fits the role perfectly, but it wasn't heavy on action. Obviously he had to cover Superman's origin on Krypton and then on Earth as him becoming this Superman. But yeah, it wasn't heavy on action, although when it did have that action it was very unique as it adapted their powers and abilities to make for some very big scale fights. Man of Steel does drag at points with this 140-minute runtime. However, it is a good movie, therefore coming in at 4th on this list. Coming in at 3rd place is Wonder Woman. Initially, this project's announcement had its doubters, me included, but those doubts immediately disappeared as soon as this film came out, as Wonder Woman massively exceeds expectations and delivers one of DC's best movies, not just in this universe, as a whole. It's not too often that the script is a huge standout for a superhero movie, but on this occasion it is, as it covers all the necessary details from the Mascura, whilst also adapting very intriguing characters, which is also helped thanks to the chemistry between Gal Gadot and Chris Pine. Despite its long runtime, this movie never drags. It's always very enjoyable and I was constantly engaged. However, towards the end, when there's the final reveals and the final act and everything, I was still engaged, but I could notice a severe decrease in quality once all the reveals, because they didn't exactly land the execution, and there was an overuse of CGI as well for that final act, which was a big difference from the previous, I don't know, 2 hours or what, 1 hour and 40 minutes. I'm not letting that final act tarnish my opinion on this film too much, as it was a very, very good origin movie for Wonder Woman, one which I don't think will ever be topped for the character. I bet you were wondering when this one would come up. In 2nd place, we have The Suicide Squad. Just like with his previous work at Marvel, James Gunn has done justice to a superhero team-up movie, whilst also delivering a lot of fun. However, this time around it is a lot different, because DC allowed his sick mind to an R rating, which he definitely uses, it's safe to say. Yes, there are those James Gunn scenes which might be too far with the action, but other than that, it also makes for some fantastic action scenes in itself, as it's just a load of fun, especially combining with their abilities. You look at the trailers and you look at the poster, you can see the cast is stacked. There's a lot of characters to be dealing with, but every single character does get their moment. It doesn't really feel like there's a main character, because no one really steals the spotlight for too long. It more focuses on this group dynamic, which is very well done, especially considering that they got all the chemistry right as well. Every actor did a superb job, from what you'd expect, like Idris Elba, Margot Robbie, John Cena. But a real standout for me, which I wasn't expecting, was Daniela Melchior. I don't know if I pronounced that at all, I'm sorry, but she played, I forgot the character's name, the one who controls rats. She was sort of like the glue for this group, and I thought she did a fantastic job, especially amongst so many big names in actors. Not that this is me, disrespecting her in any way, but she was one of the only names I didn't know about on this cast list, but she certainly stood out, which is a huge compliment to her. Where you can draw similarities with Guardians of the Galaxy also is the obscure creature with limited vocabulary who just steals the show, and Sylvester Stallone, I didn't expect him to be as King Shark is the DC's R-rated version of Groot. He is going to be a fan favorite because every scene he was in just produced laughs every single time. Overall, James Gunn does deliver the Suicide Squad movie that we thought we were getting in 2016 and creates for me the funniest movie in this franchise, filled with a lot of fun action scenes and, to be honest, some really deep moments. But coming in at first place is Zack Snyder's Justice League. It's been a good year for the DCEU so far. The two movies that they have released have secured the top 2 spots. I've obviously covered Justice League, the 2017 cut, in this video already, and I really had a lot of negatives about it, but every single aspect of this cut does improve upon them, not only in terms of quality but also execution, which is very important because we take characters like the Flash or especially Cyborg, who felt like they were non-existent in the Justice League. However, here they're given depth. He became one of the standouts of the film, and of course the 4-hour runtime does help with that, which you need to know going into this because you need to prepare yourself, or if not, you could just watch it in the 4 parts that it's separated into. But the main thing to take out of this is that this is a far superior movie to the 2017 cut. You know, the action is fantastic. There is an R rating as well, however, that doesn't really change your perspective on it. If you go into this not knowing it's an R rating, you'll probably just assume it's the same as the rest because most of the violent scenes are in the background except for one, and there is only, I think, 1 F-bomb, so you were entitled to that anyway in your normal PG-13. Steppenwolf, of course, not being the real main character as Darkseid is, you really do buy Steppenwolf as this henchman who has as well more depth and a much better character design. I mentioned in this list, Batman v Superman started to develop this Justice League project way too early in my opinion, so this film had a lot to do, and the 4-hour runtime, as I mentioned, does help it develop those things, but this Snyder Cut does manage to deliver the necessary depth to justify this team-up movie. Sorry, bad pun. But overall, a really, really good superhero movie, but one I won't rewatch loads because it's 4 hours. So that was my updated DCEU ranking with the Suicide Squad. If you are a returning subscriber and have seen my previous DCEU movies, you'll probably have noticed that my ratings are different, and that is because I either rewatched them again and obviously changed my perspective, or just in time the movie may have become better or worse in my head. A big comparison is when I made my first DCEU ranking after Wonder Woman 1984, I had that film rated as, I think it was a 62%, and then my one for the Snyder Cut, I had it as a 58%. And for this one, it's all the way down to a 50, so yeah, it's not a mistake. I do keep track of all my ratings, and yeah, just some things change over time, and like I'm sure by my next rating, some of these ratings might be different. But anyways, let me know what yours is down below, and include ratings if you want. I hope you did enjoy. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in my next video, which will be the James Gunn ranking.